Hi all. Today we're going to do a cityscape, or not a cityscape, but a seascape, landscape. In it we're going to include a small rowboat and some clouds and some water. Pretty basic watercolor, just to kind of learn and enhance some of the techniques that you learned so far. One thing that I want everybody to notice is I have this watercolor paper taped to a piece of cardboard. Make sure you do that. It allows you to it stops the paper from getting a bunch of rolls in it, and it also allows you to move the watercolors around a little bit. Make sure that you're using the watercolor paper too that you got with your supplies. Start off here with just doing a horizontal line or horizon line. This is where the sky is going to meet the water, and then we're going to pencil in our boat. Now you guys can do an image search and try to find your own boat, or you can kind of do the one I made up here. It's just a real small rowboat with a couple of oars in it. So we just pencil that in really lightly. Okay, and we're going to go over this pencil line, and then we'll come back over and do the boat in part two. Notice the size of brush I have here. It's a pretty big brush. You could even use a wash brush like you've seen in the other videos. A brush that's kind of wide, maybe a ½ inch wide, well, not even a ½ inch, maybe a ½ inch wide to do this wash. And all I'm doing right now is just laying down some water onto my watercolor paper. And this is clean water. There's no color in it at all. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in the lid of my watercolor, I'm going to take a little bit of violet, maybe add a little bit of yellow to it, and have that lighten color in my palette. And you'll see that I'm mixing it up right here. You see that I have a little bit of violet here, and then I'm going to add some yellow to that as well. And this is going to be my sky. It's kind of like a late evening sky that has that little kind of a violet bluish look to it. And then using that real light color, I'm going to start laying down my value. And remember, when you're working with watercolor, it's better to work light and then add dark things as you go, because if you go too dark right away, then it's really hard to lift or take that color away. So I'm working here kind of light. Now I will go back in and I'll grab darker color as I go. You can almost see the dullness of that color since I added a little bit of yellow to it. And just as you learn in the exercises we've done, you kind of let that water take control of the watercolor and let it kind of move around a little bit. Again, notice that's a pretty wide brush. I wouldn't say a pretty wide brush, but a pretty big brush. It's not a detail brush. If you try doing something with a real small brush, it'll just take too long, and eventually your paper will deteriorate. Notice what's happening with this color too is I'm putting it down, how it kind of dissipates and almost creates its own cloud. It's a pretty cool effect. And then if it gets to puddle on you, get your towel ready and dry off your brush and come back in and lift that color off of there. Now towards the horizon line, I'm going to go with a little bit of yellow for the sunset, and I'm dabbing that brush off, and I go back in and I get a little violet. Now here you got to be careful because you don't want to muddy it too much. You want that yellow to stay yellow and the violet to stay yellow. So right in this area we're going to try to get that cleaned up. Notice how the color, just as we've been sitting here and I've been chattering, how the clouds are just kind of dissipating. Now I'm going to take in some of my violet, and I'm going to kind of splotch in some clouds and let that water on my paper do its work. Also notice down there at the bottom where the yellow is, how that's already creating a line right where the horizon is. That's a pretty cool effect. We're actually going to come in here a little bit later on and lift some of that color up with a tissue. And there's the tissue. And this is going to help us create the clouds. And you want to do this before the color gets too set or stained into the paper. So while it's still pretty wet, we come in with a tissue and we just kind of dab away, and this makes the white part of your clouds. And you want to do it in around some of those areas where you put some dark as well. The first time you do this, just kind of go in there and have a little bit of fun with it. Don't try to get too technical with it. It's kind of spontaneous. That's the thing that's kind of cool about working with watercolor. Put some clouds there down at the bottom. Add a little bit of darker value near the top there. And come back in and do a little bit more. And this time what I'm trying to do is I want to try to keep that almost horizontal, like the base of the cloud. You can see I'm working almost a horizontal fashion. Put some clouds, put some Mr. Clouds down there and there at the horizon as well. Okay, now I'm going to go in here and we're going to mix, and this time I'm mixing a little bit of blue in here. What I want to try to do here is I'm going to start putting in or laying in some of the areas for the water. So I'm going to make a pretty light blue in there. Remember how we did with the sphere, we started with a really light value. I have a blue all ready to go, and now I'm creating my violet. And if you think about it, when water reflects, especially in the evening, it'll reflect what it sees in the sky there. So that's one of the reasons why we're getting a violet that's fairly close, probably more of a blue violet that we're going to be using in the water. So we're going to go in, and right now where we're putting it where it meets the horizon, that reflection is going to be yellow. So we start with a little bit of yellow, and then we're just going to work almost in a reverse order, except we're not going to be adding any clouds here. We're going to work in almost a reverse order with our different colors. Laid down a pretty good layer of yellow to begin with. And then I'm going to come with a little bit of violet on top of that, and a little bit of blue. I'm going to use blue in here as well. We all know what happens when you put a little bit of blue in there. Sometimes it's going to make it turn green. So you want to work it to where it maybe overpowers it a little bit, because we do want this to be blue. Pulling up my palette here. I'm going to do a little bit more mixing, some different colors. And now I'm going to work in here. I'm going to do some cleaning off that brush a little bit so I can come in and do some lifting. Now I'm coming in with a little bit of a kind of almost like a yellow and a violet to show that reflection once again. And if you remember how it initially looked, we had also incorporated some landscape. So a lot of what we're doing, we're going to be painting over. Brought in a little bit more of an intense yellow for that water right there. Now I'm mixing up a little bit, almost like probably a blue-green for the right-hand side here. I'm actually going to be putting in some land there, so I'm planning ahead a little bit. Where I put my land in, I want that reflection to show that where the land mass is. And again, we're just kind of laying down our base and kind of letting it go. We're getting pretty close to the end here. What we're going to do now is leave this dry. We could use a hair dryer, but since we won't be meeting until next class, that gives us time for this entire watercolor to dry, so when we come in, we can do a wet on dry technique. There's a little bit more violet that I'm going to put in here near the base. And now we're just going to finish up a little bit with some blue-green and just kind of be free with it and just kind of let it go. And again, here is what the end product will look like. We'll do the boat and the land masses and some of the clouds and land masses in the background at our next meeting. So have a good day. I'll see you then.